The female soldier looked at the computer screen in front of her, and it clearly showed that the sun had mutated. She called the officer in a hurry to report the situation, but the officer just came over and let her continue to work and not mention it to anyone. Aya's heart was filled with fear, because the gamma rays of the sun's explosion were coming towards the Earth at an extremely fast speed. It won't be long before all the creatures on the Earth will be destroyed. Shortly after, she was called to the combat command room, but the high-ranking officials inside did not let her participate in the discussion as the door was slowly closed. Aya knew that there must have been a huge crisis this time. After returning to the residence, he called his mother, who was hundreds of miles away, and told her that she must stay in the basement for the next few days. But before she had time to explain in detail, there was a loud noise outside. He was in a hurry to extinguish the lights and walked to the window to see that only 2 fully armed soldiers had arrived downstairs. Aya suddenly realized that something was wrong, and she blocked the door with a table for a while and then took up her military uniform and backpack and ran out. But in a panic, he left his phone on the sofa, and a few minutes later the 2 soldiers forcibly broke through the door, but there was no one in the room at that time. At the same time, a team of 5 scientists was driving a small submarine to the bottom of the sea, but their journey was not halfway through, and there was a beam of light in the deep sea that was supposed to be pitch black at this depth. So where did the light come from? The driver George decided to get on, but when they reached the seabed, they found that they had lost contact with the submarine and the navigation system was all lost. George had no choice but to open the canopy and climb out to see that there was a beam of light on the submarine near him. But the strange thing is that there was no one there, and he was calling out to the crew, but there was still no response. The group of people had to decide to take the risk and get close to the submarine and then use the rope to connect the 2. Then George and Jenny boarded the submarine together, but no matter how they searched all the cabins, they still didn't find any of the crew. It was as if everyone had evaporated into thin air, and the 2 of them had a bad feeling. Finally, in the captain's office, they finally learned a shocking news from the computer left by their colleague, which was that the sun had mutated and would kill all living things at sunrise. The military had notified them of an underground shelter near them. Looking at the face of their colleague, the 2 of them felt a little uncomfortable, but they also understood that this was definitely not a prank. In a panic, they hurried back to the front of the aircraft and then moved forward with caution towards the island that their colleagues had mentioned. Not long after, Parker found something strange on the radar. An unknown object was approaching them quickly. George looked up and speculated that the other party must be coming at them, so they decided to set sail and finally arrived at the island with the shelter not long after. But they still couldn't let go because it was pitch black at the wharf, and it was full of a strange repression. Just as a few people felt a little nervous, a huge wave suddenly surfaced on the seafloor, and then a huge object suddenly surfaced, and from the videos sent by Jenny's fiancé, he learned of the major disaster that would destroy the world. At this time, there were only 3.5 hours left until sunrise. The captain immediately ordered all personnel to split up and head for the exact location of the shelter, but as they went deeper and deeper, the terrible situation began to appear in front of their eyes. There are dozens of bodies everywhere, and there are very serious burns on them. Until then, they realized that all the residents on this island were afraid that they had no one to sleep with when they were extremely desperate. Commander Ah Chang suddenly received a report from his subordinates that a survivor had been found in the bank since the fire rushed over. The medical team's on-site diagnosis found that the survivor was breathing weakly and with severe internal bleeding. The possibility of survival is extremely low. George asked the other party where the shelter was, but they couldn't communicate with each other and couldn't get any useful information. As George continued to communicate with him, Ah Chang pulled out his pistol and ended the life of the survivor. The huge gunshot shook George's head, and he turned around and grabbed Ah Chang and asked him why he was doing this. Ah Chang believes that the situation is already critical, and they cannot waste their time on a useless person at this time. There were only 2 hours left before sunrise. Ah Chang asked the captain to order all the members to return to the ship first. But scientist Jenny did not want to give up because her fiancé was also in the shelter here. He wanted to ask the soldiers to help find it together, but Ah Chang refused without hesitation. He did not want to waste his manpower to do these meaningless things. George had no choice but to ask the captain to give them another half an hour. Then the 2 of them went to the inside of the island in a hurry. At the same time, Park and Xiaohei were ordered to repair the transformer on the island after a round of ancient knife. I didn't expect to hit the wrong thing and restore the electricity. The town's radio began to play the evacuation notice automatically, and Jenny and the 2 learned the specific location of the shelter. But when they came to the treasure in this deep mountain, They desperately saw that there was also a dead end here and everyone had turned into a cold corpse. His fiancée was also lying on the floor. Jenny, who was holding a cell phone to send him messages, was in a moment of despair. But the sun was getting closer and closer. The two had no choice but to pack up and rush to the dock as soon as possible. On the other side, a group of soldiers in the bank were building money and they wanted to take all the cash in the safe, but this scene was seen by the captain as the two sides rapidly broke out into a conflict. When the captain heard the quarrel, he rushed to the scene, but at that moment the power in the town was suddenly restored. The automatic door of the safe was closed in an instant, and a few people, including the captain, were randomly locked inside, and the only survivor who knew the password was dead. The comrades outside the door couldn't open the door at all. Seeing that the iron gate was about to close, the captain had no choice but to order Xiashi to run away quickly, and Xiashi had no choice but to watch his comrades being completely sealed to death. Not long after, the captain and others heard the news from Xiashi's mouth. But now the sunrise was coming and they had no choice but to give up the rescue. Aqiang was very angry at this, and it was all Jenny's fault that a few people asked them to search the island, otherwise the tragedy would not have happened. So a retaliatory idea appeared in his mind. The old captain quickly ordered the money to be paid, but at that moment Jenny and George had not returned and the comrades wanted to ask to continue waiting. But angry Aqiang blamed the death of his comrade in arms on the scientists. He wouldn't care about the lives of Jenny and George when he was going to close the door, and George and Jenny happened to be back, but Aqiang pretended not to see him and locked the door directly. When the submarine was about to sink, George jumped on the top of the cabin in time and kept patting it with his hand. The movement attracted the attention of the old captain, but Aqiang said that this group of people will only bring them extra trouble, and the old captain was in trouble for a while. Under the bitter plea of the members, the captain's daughter finally opened the cabin door and George and Jenny were able to enter the submarine. The atmosphere in the submarine was extremely tense because of the arrival of the scientist team. Fortunately, the kind-hearted captain's daughter was not affected. He explained all kinds of rules to the people who boarded the military submarine for the first time and settled them near the fish tank. Their daily job was to clean the toilet. Although the scientists were a little reluctant to do so, they were able to survive for the time being. But this long-lost submarine has been in crisis for a long time and people haven't had a chance to relax. The warning of the second was instantly sounded, and it was obvious that there was a problem in a certain area of the submarine. George judged that the liquid pressure system was broken. According to the thick smoke in the pipe, the old captain immediately ordered everyone to help chop the hands and feet together. After a lot of hard work, the auxiliary system was successfully activated, and the body was finally slowly restored to balance. George's skillful operation was impressive to the old captain. It was only after inquiring that George had the experience of building a submarine and that the small submarine used by the scientist team was developed and manufactured by him. At present, the original captain has been very few, and no one else has been able to take this important post. After a series of careful assessment, the old captain finally decided to let George be the new captain, but they are outsiders after all, and this appointment made the subordinate Siam military officer not happy. He said he had been in the Navy for 15 years and would never listen to the dismissal of people who are not white, considering that everyone can only survive in the end days if they are united. George was going to be calm, but he didn't expect Xia to be more and more excessive in front of everyone. He began to bully the little black Parker who was cleaning the toilet. Parker wanted to come up with a theory, but he was caught by a handful scientists who are the opponents of these 5 big and 3 rough soldiers. A few people quickly lost their mind, but Jenny was more and more angry. A day ago, he was still a scientist who was admired by thousands of people. How did he become a high-ranking person now? So he told this news to George. The two came to the captain's office to ask him to make an appointment with these lawless soldiers. But the old captain didn't think so. Instead, he thought that his soldiers would never do such a thing. But in order to ease the emotions of the people, the old captain agreed to confront them face to face. When George and Xiashi were having a friendly and in-depth communication, Little Black saw a sneaky soldier in the corridor. The other party's unease made him feel bad. In the face of Parker's bewildered eyes, the soldier opened his palm generously, and there was a grenade in his fingernail. "This is the rhythm of pulling everyone to die together," Parker told the people in the meeting. The old captain couldn't sit still for a moment. He rushed to the soldier and ordered him to put down his weapon with a very strict tone. But the spirit of the soldier was obviously abnormal. He warned the old captain. Seeing this situation, George immediately took out his pistol. "As long as the captain orders," he will send the soldiers in front of him without hesitation. The cute old captain still wanted to do the final fight. He crawled into the cabin and persuaded the other party not to do anything stupid. But the soldier's face just showed a strange smile. He told the captain that since God wanted everyone to be destroyed, we should obey his orders. The captain was stunned. After a lot of persuasion, the soldier still didn't calm down. He had no choice but to close the cabin door suddenly and lock the door from the inside to ensure the safety of the people outside. But when he was about to use his love to drive the soldiers away, the other party suddenly bowed to him. Then he detonated the grenade without hesitation. The kind old captain lost his life without meaning, and the explosion-forming shock wave directly tore a gap in the sword's hand. A lot of seawater began to rush in. If it's not dealt with in time, everyone will be buried under the sea. The situation became extremely critical in an instant. People couldn't help but be sad and want to block the gap. But this is undoubtedly a water tank. Tingshin was still under extreme pressure. Parker was also very anxious about this. I didn't expect Xiaoshu to come to me at this moment. He pinched his neck and beat him hard. Fortunately, Xiaohe was next to him. Xiaoshu left after saying a harsh word. When everyone was in a panic, the emergency disposal team also arrived at the scene. After everyone's cooperation, the situation in the water was temporarily relieved. But everyone knows that as the depth of the sink increases, the gap will be expanded again. Now we can only arrange an experienced diver to take turns to take a dip outside Tingshin. Fortunately, the current depth is only 60 meters. In theory, the water pressure is still within the human body's tolerance range. But the question is, who would be willing to do such a dangerous job? In order to save everyone's lives, George was the first to stand up. But in order to carry the equipment, another person had to go with him. Everyone was in a dilemma. The captain's daughter bravely accepted the task. Even if she had just lost her father, she still invested in this battle after wiping away her tears. The two people carried the submersible equipment, and then began to pour water into the isolation warehouse. After the pressure was balanced, the warehouse door was smoothly opened. At this time, the sea was already pitch black. In front of the huge nuclear submarine, the bodies of the two humans looked so small. They soon reached the position of the gap. But when they were about to use the steel plate to sweep the street, no one noticed that a strange shadow was flashing from behind. Shaoli, who was in charge of the alert, was about to go forward to check the situation on the street. But a bloodbath suddenly appeared, scaring him to drink a big mouthful of seawater. And the only relic near the captain's father slipped off his hands. He hurriedly chased after it, but he couldn't catch up with the sinking of the necklace. When he reacted, he found himself as if he were already far from the nuclear submarine. From the view of the rearview mirror, the surroundings were already empty, as if he were in an invisible prison. At this time, George was still nervously doing his last job. He looked at the watch and found that he was only 2.5 minutes away from the scheduled time. But Shaoli, who was next to him, had disappeared for a long time. He looked for it with a flashlight, and finally saw Shaoli, who was right at the bottom of 30 meters. After a lot of effort, he swam to the other side of the submarine, and changed the direction according to the light on the submarine in advance. There were only 30 seconds left, and they had to return to the nuclear submarine as soon as possible. At this time, the comrades in the submarine were still anxiously waiting. Even the steady George began to feel anxious. As time passed by, when everyone felt that they were in danger, a familiar call was heard from the quarantine room. The two people who were exhausted finally returned safely. Although everyone took a deep breath, their survival crisis was still not completely resolved. Hunjia could only temporarily reduce the flow of seawater, but as the depth of the submarine deepened, there was still a possibility of tearing the gap. At present, they can only travel at the lowest speed, and only when the sun sets to reach a nearby naval base can they be fully repaired. So the nuclear submarine that carried the last hope of mankind set off again. After a day's flight, they finally arrived at the Iskandaran naval base, but what disappointed them was that there was still no one at the port at that time. The soldiers had to search the base building thoroughly. In a hall, they found a secret body. The emergency escape plan that was still playing on the projector was obviously not implemented in time. Everyone had been killed by the sun. The soldiers' hearts are very heavy, but in the face of a natural disaster, no one can do anything. They can only use the highest courtesy of the soldiers to bury the bodies of their comrades in arms. Even Ah-chang, who is used to farewells, did not have illusions in front of such a tragedy. He clearly saw a little girl lying in the middle of the body and opened her eyes. When he turned around and looked again, there was still a little girl's figure. On the other side, Shiohei, who stayed in the submarine, found something strange. Why is there a flashlight in the cabin where no one lives? He was about to go up and take a closer look when a man in black suddenly appeared and turned around to escape. Shiohei was in a hurry to catch up, but the man in black's skills were very poor. He jumped out of the submarine in a few big steps. Shiohei was busy calling other people to chase him. Everyone finally blocked him in a corridor, but the ordinary Navy soldiers were not his opponents at all. He was knocked over in 3 or 2 hits. Shiohei had to continue chasing alone. He saw the other party escape into the restaurant. When Shiohei was going to search carefully, a pistol directly held his neck. Faced with the heavy encirclement of the crowd, he did not show any panic. He is the Air Force intelligence officer Aya, and he has nowhere to run. He chose to surrender. Angry Achiang decided to interrogate him, but no matter how he forced the bait, Aya just calmly answered, "I don't know." This kind of indecisive attitude almost made Achiang lose his mind. The whole ship was laughing at him. There has been no progress in the interrogation. Shihei decided to start investigating from where he expected. He searched several shops nearby, and finally found a bottle of finished cans and a military uniform with a North American logo on it in a corridor. Faced with this evidence, Aya finally revealed the truth. It turned out that he was the first to discover the mutation of the sun, and he thought of a way to escape before everyone else. That is to secretly hide in the nuclear submarine for this mission. He had been looking for food when everyone was resting, but this time he was found by Shiohei. Achiang's answer to him was obvious. He also suspected that he was a spy sent by the enemy, but he didn't expect Aya to say that during the time he was hiding in the submarine, he discovered the secret of everyone. The old captain is most likely a real spy because he had contacted someone in the outside world. When the captain's daughter heard it, she immediately went forward to shout, "How dare you slander my dead father?" But Aya was still not afraid, and let them go to the captain's office to search. Jiang Xin and Jiang Yi immediately came to the captain's office. After a search, a notebook was found in a dark place in the box. It recorded all the names of the scientist team. Obviously, they just met with George and the others, but why is there their detailed information on it? The captain's daughter wanted to get more information from Aya, but she didn't expect the other party's answer to be the same 3 words, "I don't know." Inevitably, Jiang Xin had to hang up the other party first, wait for the truth to be found, and then make a decision. But at this time, Aya said an important news, that is, the scientist Jenny was very suspicious, and said that he could use the intelligence officer's expertise to help them. Jiang Xin still didn't believe it, but what he didn't know was that Jenny had sneaked into the network intelligence room of the base, and took out his satellite phone and was ready to connect to the computer. It's a pity that it didn't work, so what secret is this scientist hiding? On the other hand, the 2 soldiers on the submarine suddenly began to land on the ground. Shiohei and George suspect that they are infected with some kind of infectious disease. Just when Achiang was about to order to isolate him, biologist Park found the real cause of the disease. It turns out that these 2 soldiers just ate a lot of food from the base, and after the sun's rays, the atomic structure of these foods has changed. Not only does it lose all its nutritional value, it also produces a toxic substance that is harmful to the human body. Only the original food in the submarine is normal, but in this way, the outside supply is almost useless, and the food in the submarine can only be stored for another week. Survivors face a more serious problem from now on. That is, either be killed by the sun, or be starved to death. Achiang did not believe that he had gathered all the soldiers to conduct a comprehensive search of the entire base. Be sure to find the normal products that have not been exposed to the sun. But the situation seems to be worse than expected. Shiohei found a lot of cans in a warehouse. By the way, the metal packaging can effectively isolate the sun, but George tasted it, and found that they were also mutated. Jenny couldn't accept this result for a while. Isn't there a can in a whole warehouse that can be used? After trying a few cans at random, she fell into a deeper despair. At this time, the sound of other soldiers came from the radio. All the food in the entire base has been completely unusable. George is still looking for it, and Park seems to have accepted this fact. He would rather choose to die in the sunrise than to see the tragedy of the extinction of food. On the other hand, Achiang chose to cooperate with Aya in the end. By unlocking Jenny's name, they discovered a shocking secret. That is, the team led by Jenny started exploring the bottom of the sea a year ago, and the real project they are studying is to build a breathable place suitable for humans at the bottom of the sea to deal with the threat posed by the mutated sun. Could it be that the official actually knew about the abnormalities but kept it a secret from the public? When Ah-chan was going to confront Jenny, everyone was suddenly attracted by the sound of a horn. They looked up at the sky in disbelief and found a plane flying through the night sky. Could it be that there are other survivors in the world? In fact, this is the plane led by the rescue team. In order to avoid the sunrise, they flew from east to west around the Earth. Ah-chan and Aya hurried back to the network information room hoping to find detailed information, but they didn't know that Gamma satellite had already destroyed all man-made satellites. In addition to the wireless power, all communication methods have failed. Although they failed to contact the captain, Aya locked the location of the plane through the radar and found that the other party was flying at a speed of 800 km per hour at a height of 9,753 meters, and soon after, it landed at Brussels airport. George guessed that the other party was definitely replenishing fuel. As long as they continue to fly west, the plane will pass the air above the base again. But no one expected that the plane suddenly changed course and flew eastward. Could it be that they found a shelter that could be used? George asked Aya to send wireless power, but Ah-chan immediately stopped it, because in his opinion, the two sides are now at odds and will undoubtedly pose a huge threat to contact each other. The two people who disagreed had a fierce quarrel. Finally, Ah-chan said that the submarine would land on time in 15 minutes. If you still want to live, then pack up and get ready to board. Although everyone was a little angry, they could not change Ah-chan's decision. As the dashboard lit up, the Sunday River submarine dived into the deep sea again. But George found that Jenny's mood was a little wrong. After inquiring, Jenny told him that Parker was tired of living and chose to stay at the docks and wait for sunrise. George took out his diving suit and was ready to rescue her, but everyone knew that all this was actually useless. At this time, Parker was sitting on the beach. He took out his passport. Maybe this is the only evidence to prove that he was wrong. Looking at the far sky, he slowly walked towards the sea. At the beginning of the day, his smile was so fixed that it became eternal. Aya finally positioned when he used his own hacker technology. He only saw it parked at an airport in Bulgaria. Is there a shelter that people have been dreaming of? When everyone was in doubt, a man's voice suddenly came from the radio. He repeated a sentence in Spanish. We are a new home created by survivors, not only deep in the ground, but also full of food. Welcome to the people who listen to the radio. Then he gave a specific precision coordinate. Everyone fell into a trance after listening. Then he focused his eyes on Parker. He received 2 news of escape. Which one is more credible? After a full balance, Parker finally made a decision. That is to go to Bulgaria. After all, there is a North American evacuation base that he is familiar with, and the appearance of that escape plane also proves that the base must still be in a usable state. However, Jenny did not think so. In front of everyone, she questioned Parker's decision, and she thought the soldiers should not carry any more guns. After all, they are going to escape, not to fight. Parker ignored this proposal. He returned to the submarine and planned to continue the investigation of the notebook left by the old captain. I didn't expect to find a piece of paper which recorded the mysterious code composed of 8 numbers and letters. Is this the mission password of the submarine this time? He took the supervisor away, and then tried to log in with this password. Unfortunately, he did not have the right to visit. At this time, there was a noise from the earphones next to him. Someone seemed to be saying that we were going to Norway. He gathered all the crew and issued an order to modify the route to Norway. The story of the night of the execution is over. Everyone was very confused about this. There was not much food on the ship. Why should we do our best to help? In order to comfort everyone's emotions, Parker had no choice but to tell the truth. It turned out that he had just heard a message from the radio. The food at Bulgaria's refugee camp was completely exhausted. Norway's Svalbard has a global seed bank. As long as you get seeds from it, you can solve the problem of food shortage by cultivating without soil. But Jenny still insisted on going to Spain. After all, from the route, it is several times less than the previous one. The two of them had a fierce quarrel again for this. George finally came out and hit the original factory. He said that Spain was also on the route to Norway. You can go there first to see the situation before you make a decision. After Jenny's cold and hot meeting, Parker could only choose to agree in the end. After 2 days of travel, the submarine finally arrived in Spain. In order to ensure the safety of the submarine, Parker not only let the soldiers carry a large number of weapons, but also specially arranged 2 small boats to land. The radio at the port kept playing the news of the new home. The sweet road sign guided the direction for everyone. Even the car was ready. Jenny and George happily thought that there was true love in the world. After a short few minutes of driving, a group of people successfully arrived at the minefield. But the elevator can only take 5 people at a time. Parker had to take George, Jenny and the other 2 soldiers down first. But they didn't know that someone had already checked their every move through surveillance. The elevator stopped at a mine hole. George led a few people inwards, but he walked for a long time and didn't even see a shadow. At this time, his companions found that the elevator could no longer be lifted. Of course, the alert captain's daughter immediately realized that there was a problem. She arranged soldiers to look for other entrances. But just when Ah Chang and others just noticed something was wrong, someone suddenly kidnapped a soldier from behind. Before they could react, a large number of miners had surrounded them. It turned out that this was a huge trap from the beginning. There was no escape at all. The miners who survived constantly released false information to attract other survivors to fall into the trap. George wanted to negotiate with the other side, but Ah Chang refused directly. He took out his gun and started shooting. The kidnapped soldiers died on the spot. A fierce fight broke out in an instant. There was chaos in the mine hole. Jenny took the opportunity to escape. After hearing the gunshot, the people above ran to the nearby control room, but found that the wire had been cut off on purpose. Shohei wanted to try to repair it, but he didn't know where to start. The captain's daughter knew the situation was urgent, so she put on gloves and slid down the elevator. At this time, the 2 sides were still fighting hard in the mine hole, but in the dark environment, the miners obviously had a greater advantage. Soon another soldier was knocked down and got a meal. Jenny, who was in a panic, came to a scary place. A few poor survivors were hanging in the air, and there were even some broken human bodies next to them. Jenny was so scared that she almost went to heaven. A survivor who had no breath asked her for help. At this time, a beam of light from a flashlight shone over. Jenny thought she could not escape this time. Fortunately, the captain's daughter was the owner of the flashlight. Seeing the reinforcements coming, Jenny still wanted to save these poor survivors. Unknowingly, a miner was slowly approaching them. At a critical moment, the captain's daughter reacted first and bravely fought with the miner. The 2 tried their best, which pushed the opponent to the top of a protruding log. On the other side, George and the captain were still fighting hard. Seeing that Jenny was about to die, they were surprised to see their pistol next to them, so one shot killed the miner in front of them. After hearing the gunshot, the others also temporarily stopped. A few people were able to meet at the elevator entrance. Jenny tied the iron door tightly to stop the miners from chasing again. George found a new controller. He held the switch with an iron hammer and climbed up at the last moment of the elevator. A few survivors finally returned to the ground. Then they kept heading for the port. But at a critical moment, a monster appeared again. The companions soon found that George and Jenny had not returned. Shohei touched a car key in his pocket. But now it's no use going back to deliver the key. Akiang could only arrange for everyone to retreat first. He took a few people to stay here. At this time, George and Jenny were still running for their lives. A group of ferocious miners behind were chasing desperately. They were about to flee back to the port. The soldiers were also ready to shoot at any time. As a result, Jenny was accidentally knocked down by the rope. Then she was caught by the miners and held hostage. George persuaded the soldiers not to shoot. But how could Akiang negotiate with these beasts? Even if George begged loudly, he still calmly pulled the trigger. Han Renjing took the lunchbox in this way. George, who was in pain, still wanted to fight with Akiang. As a result, he was knocked out by the captain's daughter with a gun. Fortunately, the survivors returned to the Sunset submarine again. Now they have only one choice left. That is to go to Norway's underground seed warehouse. But Akiang didn't care about the chaos in front of him. He repeatedly tried the mysterious code. He wanted to find out the huge secret hidden behind the natural disaster. After constantly changing the combination, he didn't expect to successfully land. There was only an email from Norway to the old captain. But Akiang understood all the truth. He immediately gathered all the members and made this secret public to the public. It turned out that the reason they were able to avoid the disaster was that they happened to meet a team of scientists led by Jenny. In fact, everything was arranged in advance. The real task received by the submarine was to search for these scientists. Therefore, the old captain would record their names on the notebook at the same time. This also means that Norway had long known that the disaster was about to happen, but every senior official just wanted to save himself. No one cared about the lives of these little people. When Akiang was doing what he was supposed to do, George suddenly rushed over and gave him a hammer. Then it was another big gun. He completely blamed Jenny's death on Akiang. Fortunately, the soldiers next to him held him down in time and did not cause the situation to escalate. And the other scientists were obviously unaware of the so-called secret mission. Even after George stopped, he was blindfolded. But because he attacked the commander, he was still forcibly locked up. But no one expected that George would turn the tables in such an unfavorable situation. He accidentally learned that there were 2 missing missiles in the submarine. And when he recalled in Bulgaria, There had been an abnormal alarm in the submarine, so the only explanation is that Okyang had launched these 2 missiles behind the back of most people. So who was the target of the attack? He used this to attract Okyang to negotiate, and only scientists know how to cultivate the soil. George decided to break the jar and break the fall. Either we hit it off and starve to death, or let Okyang's 2 trusted soldiers risk their lives to comfort the dead Jenny and Park. In order to save the lives of all the members, Okyang could only choose to compromise, but he still fell into the trap. The conversation in the cabin has been clearly transmitted to the ears of all the members through the radio. Soon, the idea that he betrayed his brothers for his life was known by everyone. Okyang's credibility was destroyed. The soldiers who led the captain's daughter directly deprived him of his command. Poor Okyang wanted to save everyone's lives, but in the end, he was discouraged by those he wanted to protect. The Sunset submarine continued to move towards Norway. Not long after, he received a strange call. The man inside claimed to be George's father. Then he revealed a great secret in the call. That is, humans are not all extinct. Some senior officials and rich people now live on an island in India. That's the only land left after the end of the world. And the reason George was able to escape the disaster was that his father begged Jenny to take him with him to study. In the end, the North Sea arranged for the Yelland submarine to rescue them. When George heard this news, he couldn't tell if it was true or not, because he and his father haven't seen each other a few times, and they don't even know who the other person is. For the sake of safety, they decided to continue to the underground seed bank. After solving the food crisis, they went to look for the island that his father mentioned. Finally, the submarine arrived at the port of Svalbard, but after landing, they found that a plane had already stopped here. Through careful observation, George was sure that this was the plane they had been tracking, so he took his weapon and followed it quietly. Not long after, he found the legendary Sunset cellar, but as soon as he walked in, he saw the man in the call who was about to execute the soldier who told the secret. George tried to stop him, but unexpectedly, he turned the gun. The 2 world lines formed a perfect connection. In a trance, George found himself lying at the bottom of the sea. Countless memories flashed through his mind, and at this time in the submarine, the survivors were completely confused, because just now, the Siam military officer was shocked to find that an unknown missile was flying towards them.